So welcome to TSL Time and Space Limited, located in real time here in Hudson, New York. Today we're presenting a Zoom event responding to the January 6th insurrection on its first anniversary. I am the host, Linda Mussmann, along with Claudia Bruce, co-host and director of TSL. Joining us today are Roger Berkowitz, Sandra Moore, Peter Schumann, and Cathy WIlkerson. This event is managed by TSL staff member Taylor Coverale, who will be recording later. This event will be recorded and we'll put it on our YouTube channel for those of you who missed it. The people who are watching may post comments in the chat site and we'll try to respond to them if time permits us to do so. Thanks for all of you being here today. It's a real pleasure to have our guests with us and supporting TSL and all of our members who make this event possible. So here we go. Claudia, take it away.
Okay, can you hear me, Linda?
Loud and clear.
Okay. I will also want to thank everybody for joining us today, and especially the 4 people who are going to be talking about this event. The first of whom is Roger Berkowitz. He's the founder and academic director of the Hannah Arendt Center for Politics and Humanities and professor of politics, philosophy, and human rights at Bard College. Professor Berkowitz authored The Gift of Science, Leibniz, and the Modern Legal Tradition. He's the editor of The Perils of Invention, Lying, Technology, and the Human Condition, and co-editor of Thinking in Dark Times, Hannah Arendt on Ethics and Politics, The Intellectual Origins of the Global Financial Crisis, and Artifacts of Thinking, reading Hannah Arendt's Ding Tagebuch. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, the American Interest Book Forum, The Forward, the Paris Review Online, Democracy, a Journal of Ideas, and many other publications. He's a co-editor of Just Ideas, a book series published by Fordham University Press, and he's the winner of the 2019 Hannah Arendt Prize of Political Thought, given by the Heinrich Böll Foundation in Bremen, Germany. Sandy Moore is an artist and a teacher who has lectured on filmmaking and film history at Cooper Union. In addition, she was an attending and clinical assistant professor of radiology at Mount Sinai and NYU Medical Center. She's currently working on a new series of paintings that will be exhibited at TSL this summer. Peter Schumann is the co-founder and director of the internationally acclaimed political theater company, Bread and Puppet Theater, now in its 58th year. He's a German-born dancer and bread maker who moved to the United States in 1961. In 1963, he founded Bread and Puppet in New York City, and in 1970 moved to the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, eventually settling in Glover with Elke, his late wife and collaborator, where both have mentored thousands of artists and performers. Peter continues to inspire and guide his company, which participates in protest movements for social, economic, and environmental justice all over the world. Cathy WIlkerson was an active participant in SDS for much of the 1960s on campuses in Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., and surrounding states, in demonstrations in support of civil rights for all and an end of Jim Crow, and in opposition to the U.S. war in Vietnam. In late 1969, she joined Weatherman, an organization which she says was good at expressing rage, but terrible at envisioning and working on plans for a more just and peaceful future. After serving a short time in prison, she eventually became an educator in New York City public schools, off and on for 20 years. At present, she continues her support for justice for incarcerated community members, works to reclaim a small woodland with native ecosystems, and to contribute to a broad-based local community where she lives. Back to you, Linda.
Here we go. Now for just a few comments from me on why we're here. The January 6th insurrection that occurred a year ago today affected us all. We witnessed the potential overthrow of democracy by an angry mob that stormed the Capitol in Washington, D.C. The mob was inspired to stop the steal and install Trump as commander-in-chief, thus denying the rightful election of Joe Biden. We all know the story. of the insurrection and have seen more footage from that day. We have listened and read many accounts of what happened that day. There are two interpretations of those events. One is the truth and the other is fiction. What happened a year ago has gone through the spin factory. Fiction has been reeled out on news channels, Facebook, Twitter, and every other means to garble the truth. Manufacturing consent is what Noam Chomsky calls this phenomena. It is impossible to escape the noise of those who want to tilt what happened when the Capitol was stormed and to make it sound as though the mob was just there visiting as tourists. Thousands attacked and breached the Capitol to stop what they were led to believe was a fraudulent election. Clearly, what happened was a failed coup d'etat. Fact and fiction are twisted and mangled. Sorting it out becomes even more blurred, as January 6th insurrection is also seen through the lens of COVID. Getting to the truth is a hard-fought battle, especially when the spinners and the autocrats are the voices who shout the loudest and repeat the lie endlessly. How do we respond to these actions and to these realities? Who wants to live in the land of disinformation? Who came to do battle at the Capitol on January 6th and why? All these things and more are potential questions, and we look for some answers today from people who are here visiting us at TSL. What are some optics? Who controls the narratives? And first of all, let's hear from Peter Schumann about some things that he's doing and thinking about. Take it away, Peter.
Okay, thank you, Linda. For me to comment on something that's called an insurrection, we call ourselves domestic resurrectionists or possibilitarians. And we commit cultural insurrection with everything we do. So for us to listen to this recounting that goes on the radio of what happened last year is a little ridiculous, because there's not a single mention of this capitalist system's regular and implanted crimes that it commits all around the globe. Not just the fact that they now made war into war that's fought between computer-educated bureaucrats who sit at little screens and bombard people out of their life. But, you know, it just looks pretty horrible, or the way they grab ownership of the vaccines that are needed. And they all know very well that the virus can only be fought world planetary fashion. It doesn't work to nationalize it and to grab it and all that stuff. We just performed at TNC with our old friend Crystal Field. It's in New York City, 10th Street, 1st Avenue, formerly Lower East Side. When we lived there with my family in the early 60s, that was a meat and vegetable and fish market. And then Crystal transformed it into a 3-theater theater, you know, fantastic stuff. And she's still going strong. And she gave us a space to perform in. And what we did was we revamped Aeschylus' The Persons, which to my mind is the greatest of tragedies ever written. Aeschylus, himself a war veteran from an earlier war, was commissioned by the Greek authorities to write the victory play after the Battle of Salamis, where the little Greek fleet slaughtered the Persian Empire, humongous army. And so he was supposed to write victory and jubilation. And what he wrote was a gigantic lamentation, the biggest anti-war play ever conceived. Just a fantastic play. And we married it to an aria of Bach's St. Matthew Passion, Erbarme dich. It is an ultimate piece of lamentation indeed, and made it into that play. Then I came home, I went to the local store to get my beer that I deserved, and everybody was unmasked, including the servers, the clientele, the storekeeper, the whole thing. I got so furious. I went home and painted 5 panels of disaster dance backgrounds. And the next day we went out, rehearsed them, and performed them in Montpellier. The thing is addressed. It's called dedicated to the non-vaxxers and no mask wearers shortly before they die of misinterpretation of the word freedom. And now we are waiting for our team to get together after the holidays, and we want to form 2 or 3 teams to be able to really go around here. Vermont is horrible in its behavior. We have a very weak governor who started off courageously with mandates, and now the party must have gotten to his nerve system or something, but now he's buckling under, and you'd see very little of masking around here, and a hell of a lot of also the even worse kind of resistance, which is non-vaxxing. These things are matters of public behavior and decency more than anything else. It's not just yourself whom you endanger, but not only your family, but whomever you meet. It's ridiculous to do that. And it's awful and needs to be rubbed in. So we're going to be rubber in us. We're going around with rubber dances and rubbing it in. Yeah, Linda, I just want to thank you for that thing. It's true, we have to invent some ways of bringing it into the street, bringing it in directly into this mishearing that happens here publicly, a real misunderstanding, and to, hopefully getting somewhere. I don't know if we can do, we wanted to take the persons to a puppet festival, a big one in Chicago. But Chicago is the worst in the union, as far as I heard. So I don't know if we can do it. I think we have to decline. So
Thank you, Peter. You always bring such hope and inspiration to all of us every time you pass through TSL. And when we see you and hear you, your wisdom is just fantastic. Thank you so much, and keep on the great work, Peter.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to Roger, is that Roger's name? Yeah. I want to tell you that Hannah Arendt came to our theater in the early 60s with Stefan Brecht. Stefan was friends with her and he brought her there. I remember her.
Wonderful, thank you.
All right, we're going to say goodbye to Peter. He has to go off and make sure the bread's okay in the oven, right, Peter? All right, take care. We're going to go into Sandy Moore. Ready, Sandy? You want to give you a chance at, we hope we have your slides ready. Here we go.
Yeah, if we don't, I can try to improvise by telling you what you would be seeing. Peter, do we have the slides? Or Teo, do we have the slides? Can we check?
We're about to get them ready to go. So
okay, I kind of need them, but I can improvise without them. Linda asked me to. I'll just start while I'm waiting for those to come up.
go ahead and start. Keep going.
While I'm waiting for them to come up. She asked me to discuss the insurrection from an artist's point of view, and quite honestly, I had no idea what that would be. Being a postmodern artist, we're all hyper individual. But I decided that since we have been flooded with images that came out of the insurrection, over 20,000 hours, I think, of video and innumerable photographs taken by the participants themselves and other people, I thought we could talk about what we saw when we looked at those images. So I'll address that, and if we can get the images up, good, and if not, I will just try to soldier on with some thoughts that I have. No?
They're coming, they're coming.
Okay, all right.
Soldier on. We know some of these images in our minds. So when they come up, we'll be very excited.
Okay, I start with, and I think you can probably pull this up in your head, the image of the several insurrectionists climbing a wall in front of Congress, on their way to breaking in. Okay, and you've all seen those images. They're kind of awe-inspiring. They really can pull you in too. They can kind of suck you in. They're awe-inspiring and they're awful. But what do they actually mean for us to look at those images of those people, many of which were taken by the people who were there? Okay, here we go. Okay, here's the slides of the people who are climbing the in front of Congress, the insurrectionists. Okay, you're aware of these images. Next image. We all know that artists have been really important in imaging and presenting to people, documenting what happens in revolutionary situations and in riots. This was a painting by a so-called naive artist named Cholat, who was present at the storming of the Bastille. And we see the people below, kind of sparse group of people below, indicated by the costumes they're wearing, what their affiliations are, but all caricatures. And we also see the brutality of this siege by the person being thrown from the Bastille in the background. Next slide. This is an image that many people think represents the French Revolution, but it does not. It is liberty leading the people, liberty leading the people. And it was painted in 1830 during an attempt to depose some of the Bourbon king. And there's a few things here that just to point out before we move on to current images. The clothing of the people when they're clothed is indicative of their class, which is something that was fairly new in art. And also we see individual faces, people who you could recognize as a particular person. Another thing that's important here is that Liberty with her right arm is lifting up the French flag, and she forms a perfect triangle. So composition trumped everything in this painting. I guess the aesthetics kind of are seductive. Next slide. This is another revolution. This is the Russian Revolution, and these are images that were made in the film October by Eisenstein, or some people may know it as 10 Days That Shook the World, and all heavily composed from a European point of view. And also, it shows the storming of the Winter Palace in 1917, even though this was shot in 1930. It shows it as if it's happening in the front steps. But in fact, the rioters broke in through the back and they had some connections with the guards, which is how they got in. It looks like a documentary though, which means that it's a simulation of a real event that could fool people to think that they're looking at the real thing. Next image. Okay, now we're to the riot that happened exactly a year ago. And these are gentlemen mostly who are in the rotunda. And you see a few things that are important here, okay? We all saw the videos of this, and these people were mostly walking around in a daze. They looked almost drugged. They were walking around because they'd reached the point where the instructions that they got from their leaders had run out, and they had to improvise what they were going to do, except for a small number of people who had very specific marching orders. And so the nice gentleman in the flak jacket to the slight right of the middle here is putting his hand gently on the shoulder of another gentleman to steady him so that he can take a self-portrait. However, that's not a police person or a military person. That's one of the participants, and they're wearing the uniforms of power or the costumes of power. Next image. And in this room of people, we see innumerable cell phones. In fact, they're one of the most constant presences that we will see in the rioters' hands at this riot. They are constantly looking at themselves and taking pictures not only of what's going on around them, but what they themselves are seeing of themselves, perhaps to pinch themselves and say, this is real, because it probably did not seem real to a lot of them. Okay, next image. So back again to the people scaling the walls. They're holding cell phones as they scale the walls. That shows you their dedication to their cameras. And you can also see that there's several different kinds of ways that people were dressed for this. They were dressed in military outfits, they were dressed in camo, and also just typical winter wear of the middle class, down jackets, expensive sneakers. Next image. Next image. This is when people have finally broken in. This is just outside the Congress. And you can see a number of things that tell you a lot about this group of people. They have a lot of Trump paraphernalia and other flags of protests and insurrection groups. They also paid for that. You know that Trump wouldn't be giving this stuff away. Trump's organization wouldn't give it away. They have cell cameras. They have cell phones. And they are obsessed with them and of looking at themselves. So they're a very self-referential group of people. Next image. So who are they? What do we know about these people? There's a little bit of work that's being done trying to really figure out the demographics of it. And of the 700, it's mostly from arrest records. So of the 725 people who've been evaluated by the National Opinion Research Center out of Chicago, University of Chicago, by Robert Pape and others, what they found is that these people do not conform, these rioters do not conform to our idea of who would be doing a riot. Okay, they're 95% white. That's not terribly surprising. They're about 86% male. That is to say, if arrest records are a good indication of women versus men at this event. The average age is 40. They're not college students, and they're not young people. They're 40 or older. 90% of them are not military. They're not in the Oath Keepers. They're not Proud Boys or 3%ers. They're, in fact, CEOs, business owners, and truck drivers. They are people who have decent jobs. Only 7% of them are unemployed. So they're well-fed, they're well-dressed, and they are not doing this riot because they are in need or they're hungry. They're also dressed in fantasy costumes as police, as military, as superheroes. They basically are dressed as if they're action heroes at a frat party. Next image. The person who I wish could paint this riot is George Gross, who painted this in Berlin in 1926 of priests, industrialists, bankers, and military people. He saw them at that time for who they were. And he also very accurately predicted what was coming. But he didn't show them as a mob or as a group of people whose faces were lost in a sea of faces. He showed them as individuals. Next image. Finally, who are these people again? Contrary to our expectations, they are not poor. They are not needy of clothing or food. They are fairly comfortable people with a place to go home to, as Trump said at the end. And they are people who are capable of violence. They're eager for violence. And they can be aimed as a group like a weapon, which is what a riot is. The difference between the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and this group of people is that in those revolutions, those first revolutions, they were done to get rid of autocrats. And this is people who are not in an oppressed class who are trying to install an autocrat. That's a really significant difference between this and the revolutions that have taken place before. I also think that it's important to realize that we're looking here in these images at a talent pool for future capos and brown shirts. And if we ignore, excuse, or glorify these people, it's at our peril. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Sandy. That was terrific. Lots to think about just in the optics of the event. And on that, we're going to bring Roger in, check out what he's going to bring to this discussion. And you're on, Roger.
Thank you very much, Linda, and thanks to Sandy and Peter. It's great to be here. I wish I were actually in Hudson with you all. So, you know, I want to start with a caveat, which is that on shortly after January 6th, when it happened last year, there was a PEN panel, the writers organization PEN, at which they asked a number of writers to speak about post-Trump politics. And Peggy Noonan, who is a Wall Street Journal columnist, former speechwriter for Ronald Reagan, sort of offered a hopeful tone. And she argued that, you know, after people allowed Trump to lick his wounds and feel respected, he would sort of disappear and Republicans would come to their collective senses and re-enter the world of fact and the real world. And she expressed confidence that a consensus would return, that Trump lost the election. And I wrote a fair bit at that time thinking she was right. I have to admit, I did believe that a kind of reality would reassert itself after the Trump presidency. You know, Hannah Arendt, in her great book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, talks about the startling swiftness with which leaders of totalitarian movements are forgotten. So that after Hitler dies or Stalin dies, their whole movement falls apart. And you know, what I think is different is that Trump didn't die. You know, he moved to Mar-a-Lago, and he was, I think what caught me by surprise, I have to admit, and so here's the caveat, is that he was able to keep himself at the center of this movement and keep defining it and keep it moving, which is what a movement is, constantly putting new claims, new lies, new assertions out there that feed the frenzy, the organization that he'd created. And there was, and the Republican leaders across the country, most of them, the vast majority of them, Lyd Cheney and others, you know, are admirable exceptions, fell in line. And I was surprised by that, I have to admit. So I want to try and understand a little bit why it happened and make some sense of it. So first, it's going to talk about three parts, two briefly, just factual backgrounds. One is this question that's already been brought up, but is to me really important of, was this an insurrection, right? I mean, if you watch, you know, news, you often hear people, I think at least the news I watch, calling it an insurrection. That's clearly not a consensus in the country. We can't decide whether it's violent or not. 54% surveyed recently by the Washington Post say it was violent. Only 26% of Republicans agree with that characterization. More than a third Republicans describe the protesters as mostly peaceful. Now, are they wrong? You know, I think that's a complicated question, and I don't think factually they are wrong. And I think we have to be honest with that, right? I just watched last night the ABC documentary on called "Assault on the Capitol," and I think one of the people got it right when they said, "Look, there was a lot of nuance amongst the people there. Some of them were there, you know, a very small amount of them were there to kill people, or maybe arrest people, or actually change the result of the election. But I think the majority of them there." And I think this is the key to me, is we have to understand, honestly believe that the election was stolen. Now, it wasn't stolen. Let's be very clear, but they honestly believe it was, and they, like many, people who believe some injustice has happened, are out there to protest, to make their voices heard. They feel disempowered. They're like, why was an election stolen and we can't do anything about it? And I think we have to understand where that's coming from and why it is, and we have to take it seriously, because right now, only 65% of this country accepts the outcome of the 2020 presidential election. 35% of the country, sorry, I'm not a math major, 35% of the country does not. And if you go to Republicans who get their news from conservative media, 54%, a majority of Republicans, believes that there was major fraudulent voting. So it's just something we have to, not deny. We have to figure it out. I mean, we should not think they're right. They're not right. There wasn't major fraudulent voting, but we need to take seriously what's going on. The second quick point I want to make is that, and I fall guilty of this too. Many of us say things like, oh my God, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. There's never been an election like this. We're questioning our very nonpartisan professional election regime. And we just have to remember that that's just a fantasy, right? I mean, the United States presidential elections have been filled with vote buying from Tammany Hall and others, corruption, huge amounts of dissension. And if you go back to the 1876 election, 4 different states put up dual slates. Republicans put up one slate of electors and Democrats put up another. And in the famous compromise of 1877, which awarded 20 electoral votes to Rutherford Hayes, who was actually behind and made him the president, what the Democrats got for conceding to the Republicans. Remember, the Republicans were anti-slavery, Democrats were pro-slavery at that time, or pro-South. What the Democrats got was the removal of the federal troops from the South and the end of Reconstruction. So here was a completely politicized election in which the Democrats in the South basically put up fake electoral slots and then negotiated for it in the end to give up the presidency, but get the end of Reconstruction. So if we think that the United States, is generally a country of orderly and rational electoral processes, we have to remember that's not always been the case, and keep that in mind. That's part of our democratic tradition, whether you like it or not. And I think it's an important thing to be aware of. So I want to come back to the real question of what's often called the big lie, or what's going on, and why I think I was wrong in thinking that after the election, some sort of new consensus would emerge, and it hasn't. I think one of the things that's happened in the last 5 or 6 years is people keep throwing around the word totalitarianism. And as someone who reads a lot of Hannah Arendt and her book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, it's been a time for me to really think about this a lot. And I wrote a piece 5 years ago arguing, don't call Trump a totalitarian. We're not seeing terror being used. We're not seeing random arrests and things like that. And I think that's still the case. What I did say at the time is that Trump seems to be a totalitarian leader, in the sense that he is the leader of a movement very much along the lines of what a totalitarian movement is. And I think this is an important distinction, that Arendt distinguishes totalitarianism in power versus a totalitarian movement, which is not necessarily in power. And while a totalitarianism in power uses ideology and terror to isolate and mobilize a population, a totalitarian movement can't do that because it doesn't yet have the possession of the means of violence. It can't act fully, freely. It can't make what it says a reality simply by imposing it. And so the true goals of a totalitarian movement, as opposed to totalitarianism in power, is to use propaganda, not to persuade people, right, but to organize them. And that's what I think we have seen with the Trump movement, the Make America Great movement, whatever you want to call it. And that what we have to understand is the incredible organization that has been created. What distinguishes a leader like Trump, a totalitarian movement like the Trump movement, is that they have what Arendt calls a single-minded purposefulness with which they choose those elements from existing ideologies which are best fitted to become the fundaments of an entirely fictitious world. So look at some of the things he's picked up on, right? There were mail-in ballots were used at a level never before seen, partly because of COVID. Drop boxes, the universal absentee ballot. These were real changes. These were new things that happened in this election that had never really happened before. We always had some absentee ballots, always had some mail ballots, but much larger. And they use these to build up a reality, a fictional reality, a fundaments of a fictional world, so that everything he says is designed to this. Another aspect of that fundamental fictional world, and this goes back to what Sandy was saying about the University of Chicago research done by Robert Pop, not sure. Everything Sandy said is absolutely right, that these were white CEOs, not young, fairly well off. But one thing that Pop has also discovered in his research is that the only common denominator that he found amongst the protesters is that they are mostly from counties that have seen the white population shrink fast and the non-white population grow rapidly. Now, I'm building on a recent article by my colleague Sanjeev Barua, who made this point in his essay, and Sanjeev connects this background of this common denominator, that these folks are largely from counties in which the white population is shrinking and the non-white population is growing, with the Great Replacement narrative, which comes out of France. Some of you probably know it, but a man named René Camus and many others have been making this argument that France is losing its Frenchness and is being taken over by a kind of multiculturalism, immigrant, Muslim, North African population. And that in the name of diversity, there should be still countries like France that aren't multicultural. And they make a diversity argument. They make a plurality argument. And that this is why I think the whole plurality, the diversity argument is so dangerous, because it leads to the possibility of a kind of white nationalist argument in which white nationalists say, well, why can't we have a white country if you're going to have a black country or a Muslim country or an immigrant country? And so this is the argument. I think this is part of the foundation. And so what you see with the art of a totalitarian leader like Trump, the art of his work is that he takes real facts, that there is more voting, that there are drop boxes, that there are universal ballots, that the white population is diminishing. And he purposes that in a simple-minded way to create a fictional world of us and them, and a world that is not real, that is not true, and yet is so deeply meaningful and important to many people that they can't imagine any other facts being true. I'm going to just talk about two parts of this, which Arendt mentions, which I think are really important. One is the division that she makes in the Nazi and Bolshevik regimes between front organizations, elite formations, members of the party, sympathizers, and fellow travelers. We don't have all of that yet in Trump, but there's no doubt that many of the people who vote for Trump are what she would call fellow travelers, people who don't really love Trump, but go along with it for a whole host of reasons. Then there are sympathizers who generally agree with some of what he says, but, don't like him. There are even members of the Republican Party, the Trump Republican Party, but again, don't love what he does. And then there's what she calls these elite organizations, elite formations and organizations, front organizations. And they are made up mostly of elites. And these elites Arendt understands as deeply cynical. The elites, she says, are not ideologists. It's not like they have an ideology. And I don't think Trump has much of an ideology. In fact, I've argued many times he doesn't. What he is cynical. Their members' education, the elite members, she says, is aimed at abolishing their capacity for distinguishing between truth and falsehood, between reality and fiction. Their superiority as elites consists in their ability to immediately dissolve every statement of fact into a declaration of purpose. The point is, they don't actually believe a lot of what they're arguing for. They seek power. They want power. And the negative quality that they have is that they never stop and worry about whether it's true or false because they're cynics. They don't believe in truth or falsity anymore. They don't believe in facts. And their cynicism allows them to simply take anything that happens and turn it around to make an argument justifying their power. And their argument is then moved through propaganda to motivate a gullible citizenry or a gullible series of fellow travelers and party members. That's what I think is going on. Why it's going on is complicated. And I think it's not just one, it's not simply the loss of white membership in certain counties, although that's part of it. I think it's also a deep sense of people's feeling of powerlessness and loss, that they have lost control of their country. Now, we can be cynical about that. And, the line you hear is, oh, well, when you had privilege and it's taken away, you don't like equality. Equality feels like a loss. But people's lives are being upended and they are being manipulated by a very powerful group of cynical elites. And I guess, and this just comes back to my mea culpa for the last year or two, I have continually underestimated the cynicism of the elites of the Republican Party. That's just been I'm generally an optimistic person. And I just generally thought that a lot of these elites would at some point return to reality, and it hasn't happened. And that's dangerous. It has convinced me more than I was convinced a year ago that what the Trump organization really is a pretty much full-fledged totalitarian movement, which doesn't have power, doesn't have violence, doesn't have the means of violence yet, but it might. Now, what's unclear to me is what happens when Trump leaves the picture, right? Does this all fall apart like it did under Hitler and Stalin? Is Trump the sort of magic sauce at the center that keeps this thing going? Or will this continue? And that's what I'm not sure about. But I think that as long as he's around and he's going to run for president, which I assume he will, and I assume he will run, he'll win the nomination, and on election day of 2024, he will declare victory, whether or not he wins or not. As long as that continues, he's incredibly dangerous. And I think it's important that we continue talking about these issues and keep our eye on what's going on. So I'll stop there. And thanks very much, Linda.
Thank you, Roger. That's a lot to take on and take in. All I can think about is Roger Stone, the ultimate manufacturer of chaos and lies. So, Cathy, are you ready for your debut?
Ready or not, here I come.
All right, we're eager to hear what you have to say. It's a very exciting conversation today. Thank you all so much. And for everybody that's listening in, we really think this is important to hear from people like ourselves. So, Cathy, take it away.
I don't have a prepared, excuse me, rap, but when I think of insurrection, sorry, I've been silent for a long time. When I think of insurrection, I think about violence, about chaos, about craziness. And that was true in France and in Russia and here, although there were, as Sandy pointed out, differences. And there's something sort of astonishing about it, that it happens spontaneously. I feel like the insurrection last year, there's no question it was fueled by a sense of displacement, of anxiety, of fear of loss. And the people, I can only speak for this country, but in this country, people are negotiating a communication system with the internet that is new, that is overwhelming, that is widespread, and that we don't know how to negotiate yet, most people, that how do you tell what's true or not true? I was a teacher and kids were just completely mystified. How do you tell what's true? What should I read? What shouldn't I read? What should I read both sides? These were huge questions which students felt free to ask, but I'm not sure that so many adults felt free to ask that. But underlying all of this, the insurrection last year, and much that happened with Trump, I think we have to, as Roger said, look back at history. And there's no question that this country has never had really fair elections, that there's always been a fantasy narrative that's been part of the United States. That started when we came here and took the land at tremendous cost to the people that were here and immediately set up a plantation system. So in order to justify that, in order to make sense of that, there has been a fantasy narrative from the get-go. It's changed forms slightly from year to year, been less gross, less obvious in some ways, but it's always been at the heart of the United States. And there's always been a core of people whose individual and professional livelihoods depended on the fantasy. So, and the ability of leaders in the country to manipulate that fantasy has been a thread all the way through. How is each leader going to do it on a local, state, and national level? So I just wanted to throw that out as a common thing in our history, and that comes up over and over again. There still is random violence. Random violence has underpinned the system from the get-go. And if you speak to any Black mother, she can tell you it's one of the first things on her mind once her children hit the age of 10 or 11. So it's just something that we need to keep in the back of our mind. At the same time, so this sets off things in me. I feel like I've been in a rage all my life about injustice, about what's happening, and trying to manage how to live with that, which at some periods I've done better than others. And so when this anniversary came up, and then when Bell Hooks died, I sort of dove back into the Bell Hooks books. And the two in particular that I found quite relevant One is called Killing Rage, that she wrote in the 90s, and the other is called All About Love. And Hooks wrestled with these two alternate emotions. And I think we saw a lot of rage in the insurrection last January. But rage, we all have a lot of rage about various things. And Hooks really explores that rage from a social justice point of view and says, that where our well, let me read a quote. She says, when culture is based on a dominator model, not only will it be violent, but it will frame all other relationships as power struggles. And I found that approach to looking at life to be incredibly powerful, because I have to always keep checking myself. Am I slipping into a power struggle when I find somebody that I don't agree with, or some action that I think really needs to be changed, or I want to initiate something and I know there are obstacles? How do I keep aware that this framework is not a framework that I like? I don't think we should be defined by power struggles. And so but it is a framework around us, and Trump is the master of that. Trump is a brilliant showman, and he's always been a brilliant showman, whether it was in the real estate business or in TV. He was a master of fantasy and showmanship. And he has been, and then he made this alliance with other elites who have an interest. And I think it's completely true that they're all very cynical. But I also think, I know that they hold a firm belief in the superiority of some people over others. And the ultimate proof, and Trump is explicit about this, the ultimate proof of somebody's worth is their ability to win a battle, to come out on top, to be a fighter. And I think that defines a lot of the movement. That supports him, that these are people who see themselves in isolation. They're losing a fantasy life that they've sort of given them a sense of value for a long time. These are the followers I'm talking about, not the people necessarily at the insurrection. But I think the statistic about the counties is very telling, that this is a moment of great change and enormous change. And it's the beginning, and it's going to take another 50, 80, some odd, who knows, depends on what happens with the environment. But this is a lot for people to get used to who've been depending on a narrative of value. And the Democrats don't put out an alternate narrative about value. And too often, people are left with no alternative, really, but Trump's narrative. And I'm not talking about the hardcore, the people at the insurrection. They're a different can of worms, in the sense that they do sincerely believe in the superiority of some people over others. They are profoundly racist, and they are part of this tradition. The financial elite knows that economic growth depends on exploitation. They know that. And so how are they going to manage that economically? And the way they manage it, not only here, but around the world, is you divide and conquer. And it's a platitude, but it happens to be a very functional one. And so we're stuck in this world where the dominator model is the prevailing model at this point. Hooks's other argument is that if you're going to fight that, you can't accept that paradigm. And the paradigm that we need to move towards is a paradigm of love. Now, this is not the 1960s hippie bells and whistle love, although it would include that, but it's saying that we have to imagine forms of struggle, of fight, that are based on inclusiveness, are based on reimagining the world that we live in. How can we, I mean, those of us who believe in equality and justice and peace, and we exist all over the world. There's millions of us. So it's not that this is a tiny little group. This is a vast group of people who are doing all kinds of things in local communities, all the way up onto the national level. So they're fighting for specific pieces of legislation to make the world better. They are fighting against environmental injustice. They're coming together around housing. You name it, it's everywhere. And it's an alternative narrative. It doesn't focus on opposition, doesn't focus on in its best form, or the way that Hooks is talking about it. That it tries to build, not burn, basically, that sort of old phrase from the 60s. And I think that's really exciting. It's going to be, the next decades are going to be more and more messy and complicated as we negotiate these massive changes in the world, particularly around technology. And that what matters is that we learn how to build community, how to work in communities, and how to figure out which struggles we're going to take on based on a collective sense of support and love and belief that we can win these small battles. I don't think, I think Trump is a showman. I think when Trump goes, there will probably be somebody to step up, but they won't be as good at this point. But these battles, there are state leaders that will fill the shoes on the state level. I think altogether it's very murky how it's going to play out on the national level. But it's incredibly important, particularly with environmental challenges that are coming. Disaster after disaster after disaster. One of the times that people come together is around disasters. And we need to be there, be prepared, and be thinking in our work. And everybody here does some kind of work. And that this is going to be raggedy, but our relationships are what are going to hold us together. And we have to embrace the differences in this country and in the world. And the differences are huge. I can't sleep with loud music on. So I don't want to live in a neighborhood where everybody plays loud music all night, which I did when my kids were little, and nobody would come stay the night with them because it was too loud. But in other cultures, loud music is a wonderful celebratory thing, and there's all kinds of occasions and reasons to have it. And when I was young, I liked loud music too. So how do we, that's a silly little example, but how do we embrace the differences and learn to live together and negotiate and talk to each other, and reserve our judgments for when we need them. But at the same time, as we're building on love, let's be clear. The Trump people and whoever replaces them on the national, state, and local level are violent, fundamentally violent. Racism is violent, and sexism is violent. So we need to keep that in mind and protect each other, protect other people, and never forget about that reality. That doesn't mean you fight violence with violence, totally not. But it means being aware that that's a reality, and it's going to be an increasing reality in the next 10 or 20 years. as protected as some of us may be now, our family, our children, anybody who's people we love are out in the middle of the throes. So on the one hand, I think it's a really exciting time because there's tremendous opportunities for creativity. But I also think we need to look squarely at the racial and the very, very violent racial history of this country and how that informs narratives of power and always has. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Cathy. I think one of the things that, excuse me, that I'm thinking of right now is that until this filters out and touches all of us and all of them, whoever them is, it is still some kind of a big movie because the images keep going across the screen. And until some of these, maybe these lawsuits and criminal charges against people filter into the communities that have touched people deeply. And it's the same with COVID. You know, it's unfortunate that the more people get sick, the reality of the disease sets in, I think. Claudia, do you have any comments you'd like to make?
Well, this is pretty amazing. I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but I do have a little homage that kind of goes along with what Cathy was saying and what everyone's building on a little bit. And it's an homage to Elizabeth Cotten, whose birthday was yesterday. And if it's okay, I think I'll just strum a quick little tune. This is, as I said, an homage to her. These are words that Linda wrote as an interlude. This is my heart. This is my hand. This is my hope. This is my land. Oh, Lordy me, let's make jubilee. Everybody's got to take a stand. Everybody's got to lend a hand. To take a stand or not to stand. Some look around and then sit down again. Oh, Lordy me, let's make jubilee. Everybody's got to take a stand. Everybody's got to lend a hand. Thread the needle, stitch the wound. Come on, get up, bay at the moon. Oh, Lordy me, let's make jubilee. Everybody's got to take a stand. Everybody's got to lend a hand. Go on, move up, push up the hill. Crawl if you have to, but get there you will. Oh, Lordy me, let's make jubilee. Everybody's got to take a stand. Everybody's got to lend a hand. What I'd like to say.
Fantastic. Any other comments out there from my astute speakers? It's really been a pleasure to hear all these comments. I have so many things in mind. I think about the wrestling matches that Trump celebrates and how it's all just a show. And it's just another day in the world of fighting and hating losers. The World Wrestling Championship certainly framed his campaign and continues, and we can't we can't let that rule us. There has to be more creativity and more love for the people and places that need to be supported. Places like the Hannah Arendt Center at Bard does great work. All of the community work that Cathy does in the community, and Claudia Bruce and Sandy and all of you are doing this amazing thing, and participating today with TSL is part of making a difference. I think our voice is really, I think we need to speak and talk and explain and come together and make sure that we are heard loud and clear. So it's, Sandy, go for it.
Real quickly, Anna Kindgren and Karina Gunars, which is a collective in Stockholm called Love and Affection, send their love and affection and solidarity to us. I wanted to let you know.
So that's it, everybody. We want to wrap this up. I think this has been a great discussion. This will be recorded and we will put it on YouTube, and many more people can share in this conversation. Thanks everybody for joining in. Thanks all who support TSL, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Linda. And Claudia.